Liar. Everywhere. On netrootsradio.com. David Waldman. Kagro. In the morning. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hey, good morning, everybody. How you doing? It is Thursday, December 29th, 2022. Jumped right in early on that introduction today. I guess that you might mistake that for my being ready for the show, but it doesn't matter whether I'm ready for the show. At this point, we just have some small talk. Then we invite Greg Dworkin to come on, and then we talk about serious things. One of the things I'm alerted to this morning, every morning I'm alerted to, some hint as to what is in the news as Justice gives us the thumbs up and lets us know that everything is alive and working today. And let's see, his brand new news is what? George Santos has won the Nobel Prize. What what for, I wonder? We don't really know. It just says the Nobel. It could be for anything. More developments on the George Santos front. That is unbelievable but true. So we'll jump in on that. I guess the big news on him is that there are a couple of investigations. Now, he finds himself under investigation. I think probably a race at this point to try to see if they can find something before January 3rd that so discredits him that the incoming, even Republican Republican majority in the House refused to seat him. I don't think they can find anything that will convince them not to do it. And they can always say, well, if you find something and a court of competent jurisdiction should find him guilty, then perhaps we'll consider unseating him at that point. But in the meantime, you know, he's no worse than any of the rest of these liars here, so they'll probably take him on. I did mention under investigation now a federal investigation and a state level investigation. We can go over the news reports of those things and get the details as we find time for that today. But in the meantime, we'll just have to, I think, take his word for it that he won the Nobel Prize for something. That's got to be true. Of course, it's Justice's word, so we'll take it very differently. All right. Well, let's see. Lots happening here in our second to last show, not only of the week, but of the year. And we get to make all those fun jokes pretty soon about seeing you next year. I note for the record, haven't updated you in the last couple of days, the Loudoun County, Virginia rolling 7-day average in terms of reported cases of COVID had peaked just above 100 cases a day. I think we maybe noted that, and it sort of stayed there and it dropped back down just under 100 yesterday and then back down to 92 yesterday. So I think people are just not necessarily reporting their infections at this point. This would be a lull week anyway, so I wouldn't make too much of it. But and anyway, it's out there, and we remind you of it from time to time just to keep you on your toes and keep you masking if you've got that inclination. And if you don't have that inclination, go get that inclination because it's good for you on a number of fronts. All right, so let's see. We have that. We got George Santos stories, which we'll catch up on. Oh, I see Politico's Kyle Cheney has put together a top hits list, I guess, from his reading through of the January 6th transcripts, their interview transcripts. So we'll get some sense of what who's a little of a tastemaker among political junkies, I suppose you could say. So we'll get some sense of what he thinks is important and therefore what others are talking about. We will catch up on, I think we'll get some time to catch up on Kari Lake and her continuing saga in Arizona. Arizona Republicans continue to go absolutely bonkers on every possible front. I have another surprise Arizona story for you later. Oh, wait a minute. No, that may be a Nevada story. Yes, okay. Well, Desert Southwest Republicans in general continuing to lose their mind. Kari Lake, as you know, filed suit to overturn the results of her election, her loss. She was more or less thrown out of court. I think she had a 10-count complaint. The judge was extraordinarily generous to her in throwing out only 8 of the 10 complaints and saying, well, I'll give you a day or two in court to make your case on the other 2. And then they had their day in court because they had to do it quickly because the inauguration is coming up for Arizona governor, and she lost. She's already filed the appeal and already signaled that she intends to take it all the way, at least to the Arizona Supreme Court, and then who knows where. And she's been making noises about the rightness of her claim. I understand she was tweeting yesterday about a case in North Carolina, I think, in which a judge, or maybe it was Georgia. That's right. It was in Georgia where a judge ordered a new election in a local contest where the difference in votes, between winner and loser was in single digits, I think. And they were upset about a certain voting complication that may have changed the outcome. And it's a plausible explanation. She, of course, is pointing to their plausible explanation and saying, wouldn't it be plausible that we could have the same situation here in Arizona? Not on the same scale. It didn't happen that way. The numbers are completely out of whack. There's almost no applicability, but you know how it is. I heard a judge ordered a new election, so therefore that's a remedy that's available. I, with my fake evidence, want the same outcome. She'll be outraged when she doesn't get it and insist that this is a biased judge as opposed to someone who says, well, if there are 7 votes between winner and loser and 1,000 people got the wrong ballot, you might have something. Whereas, if you lose by tens of thousands of votes and a couple hundred people got the wrong ballot initially, but then were handed the right ballot, or even if they weren't, it wouldn't make a difference. Anyway, you get the idea. But she, of course, continues on and insists that she is due the same outcome as they had in Georgia, even though, the situation is entirely different. Okay. So that's a good preview, I think, of what we will get to. We'll see where Greg takes us and where you take us with your notes to us either on Mastodon or the Bird site using the KITM hashtag, or email, or any of the other channels available to you. Speaking of which, I did get an email I want to acknowledge from Linda Chapman, who wrote about the George Santos situation and, just pointing out, I think, the linguistics of his strange backfilled claim about not actually being Jewish, and explaining that there was a Jewish background somewhere in his ancestral history so that he was calling himself Jewish. She was taking exception with that and saying, well, you can't say, well, I am Jewish or I am a Jew. But if you were saying ish, you would be perhaps Jewish-ish rather than Jewish. But, it's all a joke, of course. He's just lying and looking for a backfilling way of getting out of there and explaining how the words I'm Jewish would come out of your mouth if you weren't, in fact, Jewish. So, I don't know. I wouldn't parse it any further than that, Linda. He was lying and looking for a way out. And I guess if we engage him on the grammatical level, it's a large-scale waste of time, considering that he's probably stealing your wallet while you're doing that. So anyway, I think that's good advice. We can put that aside, and, well, there's more lies to focus on, and what a great day to focus on that. Good morning, Greg, who is going to bring us the truth about most of those lies.
Oh, stop lying about what I'm going to do.
Well, I thought you would give us the truth-ish about it. Let's say that.
Yeah, so he wrote it as JEW-ISH.
Yes.
I suppose he could have done the Stephen Colbert Jewy.
Yes.
Jew-like.
Right.
Jew-adjacent. I don't know. But
right.
I do know this. Roger Sullenberger found a tweet from George Santos from 2020, which went like this.
He was
on July 3rd, Santos tweeted, "Martin Luther King didn't die for us to go back to segregation. As a biracial person,
wow.
I stand tall against segregation of any kind. The so-called Black Anthem is the most divisive thing I've ever seen." And somebody said, "How are you biracial?"
That's a good
he
question.
Said, "Well, I'm Caucasian and black."
That's new.
That's what he said, July 6, 2020.
Okay. Well, he's got a Brazilian background. There could certainly be some
he could,
African
but I'm just saying,
roots.
I don't know.
On the other hand, it's George Santos, so there could certainly be none. So,
right. So we don't know. It's certainly absolutely
biracial.
possible.
That's a good one.
It's
also,
certainly
Black
absolutely
Anthem.
not clear that just because he said it, it's true.
Well, that's definitely true. It's almost assuredly the opposite. I don't know what. I guess he was complaining about maybe kneeling during the national anthem, or
I don't
was
know
it
what he's
something else?
complaining about.
Black
I don't really
anthem.
care. I'm
Oh,
just
well,
saying,
okay.
he's just throwing out some other stuff there. So, he's a fabulist, and you wonder about fabulous. So, the
I
only
guess
thing I
so.
could say about these investigations is that
They're
there's
happening.
two aspects of it. One is that people actually sit down and look at what he said and see whether or not there's anything illegal. Usually there isn't. There's nothing wrong legally
And
in our
saying
rule of
dumb
law with lying about
things.
running for politics. Just about anything you say when you run is fair game, unfortunately, and it's up to the buyer beware kind of thing.
Yeah.
But what if his campaign was lent lots of money that he didn't have, and he lied about stuff on his
yeah.
finance parts of his campaign paperwork?
Right.
That's the one thing that might actually be relatively quick to take a look at and might get settled before next week. Next week being important because that's when the next Congress starts.
Not so important.
So it's important, to
I don't know. Who?
McCarthy.
Oh, yes.
Kevin
right.
McCarthy thinks it's really important.
He might
and there's
get a new
another
job.
story there in terms of how he's dealing with the George Santos thing. But the folks on Long Island,
Yes.
Long Island, that's LON, capital GISLAND, are looking at it. This is from the New York Times write-up. Questions remain about how Mr. Santos has generated enough personal wealth to be able, his campaign finance filing show, to lend his campaign $700,000.
Yes.
There's a broke guy who couldn't afford to pay for his mother's funeral, which apparently happened at two separate times.
Yes, she died twice.
She died twice. Mr. Santos has said his money comes from his company, the
Sure.
DeVolder organization, but has provided little information about its operations. It's unclear how far the Nassau County inquiry has progressed, but the DA, Ann Donnelly, who, by the way, is a Republican, said in a statement that Mr. Santos's fabrications are nothing short of stunning, and she added, nobody's above the law, and if a crime was committed, we'll prosecute it. The statement by Ms. Donnelly, a Republican like Mr. Santos, added to the growing pressure. Santos was elected in November to represent northern Nassau County and northeast Queens in Congress beginning in January. It's a strange area in terms of political affiliation. Mm-hmm. And, definitely Lee Zeldin and the billionaires who back him spent a lot of money shaping their own narrative about what's going on there. So that's all mixed in to what's going on. And, it's quite interesting. This piece from Politico, in addition to the transcript, tells things you mentioned. I might get to that. You might get to that. This is Santos scandal crashes into McCarthy's speakership battle. The GOP leader has stayed silent as the incoming Republican congressman has admitted to several lies about his background. That's a polite way of saying it. And, McCarthy, with only 4 party votes to spare in an open rebellion, needs all the support he can get, even if it comes from a member-elect steeped in scandal. One of the many reasons I don't think McCarthy will wind up being Speaker in the end. Here it is a couple of days before he's actually going to have the vote, and we still don't know that he has the numbers, that he has the votes. And I don't think that he's ever, unlike Nancy Pelosi, shown himself to be a pretty good vote counter.
No, he's usually pretty bad at that. That's just not a skill he's got.
So at a minimum, it's a colossal lack of judgment that has now put the conference in a very difficult position, retiring Representative John Katko, Republican, New York, who represented a similarly moderate district in the state, said of Santos. Moderate is defined in many different ways. Do they defend someone they know has made several material misstatements about his background, or do they cut him loose with a razor-thin majority? Katko added, calling it a no-win situation. And House Republicans think that once they have a speaker, they'll know what's going on with Santos. As of now, only Democrats are calling for Santos to resign from the post that was considered a long-shot win for Republicans in the first place. And, of course, Santos folks didn't respond to the story.
Yes.
So, we'll see what happens there. I'm a pessimist because I think that most of the time people get away with stuff.
Well, I don't believe that you're a pessimist, so there.
Well, you're lying about that.
Okay.
So we'll see what happens. It's just such a bizarre story. It's really hard to figure out how this ends.
It is. It's weird. As you mentioned, a weird place that he's representing. Not that he lives there necessarily. right, that borderline Queens, Long Island thing. I guess I would say Archie Bunker land in a way.
Yeah, pretty much. I mean, they're willing to vote for Democrats, but not always.
Right.
And
So
it's
there's a
not difficult
conservative
to
streak.
convince them, at least short term, that something else is going on.
Yeah. So right,
They're open to being fooled.
Yeah,
I guess is the
so.
way I would put it.
All right. Yeah, and I mean, in all likelihood, probably people think living there thinking New York and the New York media market is somehow protection against that. Like, you can't just lie about that because the Post will kill you. Well, not yet.
So, we're talking New York Post, not Washington Post.
Right. So mostly, people just figure, well, who's going to lie about that? And you don't, also, you don't go around New York lying about your mom dying in 9/11 normally.
Yeah.
And you get away with it.
Now, somebody has to make something out of it, but that includes the media. So,
Yeah.
Again, if you're putting millions of dollars into ads misdirecting you on something else, like New York being a border state to Mexico, and therefore it's all about caravans.
That can work
or crime.
for some people,
which
right?
Generally, is what they do. They just don't do caravans. They cross out caravans in crayon and they write in crime, and it's basically the same thing. So, let's just bounce around a little bit
All right.
before we do some other stuff. I don't truly understand or remember the origins of this show. That's
This
up
show?
to you to determine and decide. But from my perspective, it's actually fairly simple.
Where do we come from?
I like to talk to my friend David a couple times a week, and that's basically it.
Yes. Now
one
there's
here.
a microphone here. So you can hear it.
There's times that I talk about things that I want to talk about. There's times I talk about things that I think we should talk about.
Yeah.
And then there's plenty
right.
of times I just talk.
Right. We do
and
that.
So in the space between,
show that way.
Christmas and New Year's today, is one of those days.
Yeah.
So let me talk about stuff I want to talk about.
All right.
Which has nothing to do with anything, but I just think is interesting. The Verge
make up a
points
background
out
for
that
yourself.
on midnight of December 31st
Yeah.
in the United States,
Right.
as we move over to the new year,
That's what we're doing.
Sherlock Holmes escapes copyright. The last story about Sherlock Holmes was written 95 years ago. And for reasons that I don't fully understand because I didn't look it up, there was a U.S. public domain freeze for 20 years, which ended in 2019. So the weekend's public domain day will give Cultural Commons a couple of notable new works. They include things like the science fiction movie Metropolis, which you'll probably be able to see on YouTube, Virginia Woolf's To the Lighthouse, the first full-length talkie film The Jazz Singer, and all of Arthur Conan Doyle's Sherlock Holmes stories.
Well.
So following that, that means
elementary.
that anybody could write anything they want without getting sued by the Arthur Conan Doyle estate,
Okay.
which likes to control everything if they could, but they can't. And as Arthur Conan Doyle is reported to have said, as far as Holmes is concerned, you can marry him, murder him, do whatever you want with him.
Oh, okay. I know that game. Right. Goodness.
Except you can't do it in Canada.
Oh.
Because they had their own law that froze things where they were in 20 years.
Huh.
And, one of the more interesting, that's for this year.
Yeah.
But the following year,
Yes.
it's going to be a big fight.
2024?
Yeah.
Okay.
Because that's when the public domain of Mickey Mouse
Oh.
comes up.
Are they going to let that happen?
Well, again,
I think that's
I
how we
sent
got
you
the last
one of the
extension.
original cartoons, and you
Do I
could
have to
see the big sign, the front gate, and then behind the wall, you can't see anything, but you can see people talking. And one of them says to the other, "What kind of Mickey Mouse operation is this?" And so, the point is that that's a well-established meme at this point. And so Mickey Mouse is in the public domain in certain cases. I just gave you one.
Yes. All right.
And how they argue this and whether or not law allows or doesn't allow, or if it's current, or I don't know anything about that. But just get ready.
All right. Well, I'll do my best. I wonder if that's my recollection is this is kind of how we got the extension last time. Was we sort of the Congress realized what enormously valuable properties would be otherwise introduced to the public domain, and it would really be a seismic shift in our economy if Mickey Mouse, for instance, falls into the public domain. Most of the GDP of Florida and really the United States is based on the Disney Corporation suing people
Yeah,
So,
but like, who's going to defend him? DeSantis?
Right.
I don't think so.
oh, well, I don't know.
Things have changed. Politics.
Yeah, he's
have changed.
mad at that's true. Well, there's still a Florida delegation. There's plenty of time to bribe people. So we'll see about that one, whether that comes through. Meanwhile, I guess we'll do, it's time to build the Sherlock Holmes theme park I've been dreaming of
Yeah.
for years, I guess. Not really, but.
Is he married? Is he murdered?
Yeah.
I mean, you can do whatever you
murder,
want.
right. You murder Sherlock Holmes in the park and then go on a roller coaster.
Right.
That's my thought. Well, all right. So we'll keep an eye on that. I mean, I don't think that they're certainly not in the same position as Disney to battle on and just say, we want an exception to the law. Interesting that Canada protects them for even longer. They'll be smuggling in, illegally produced or illegally imported, Arthur Conan Doyle fan fiction, I guess.
Yeah.
Or Sherlock Holmes fan fiction.
Anyway, so speaking of writers,
Yes.
and Arthur Conan Doyle was a writer. So I was on Twitter this morning,
What?
as well as Mastodon. I'm on both,
Yay.
but sometimes the people that I want to talk to happen to be on Twitter. I'll give you an example. So let me just remind you who John von Neumann is. That's not who I was talking to.
Oh, all right. Yeah.
He died in 1957.
I mean, that's some system.
John von Neumann was a computer scientist, engineer, polymath, mathematician, physicist, very famous, extremely brilliant.
Congressman for New
There's
York
a story,
District.
Edward Teller, another brilliant physicist, used to tell that, he and von Neumann were friends and worked on a lot of projects together, and von Neumann was known to be very nice. And Teller said, I saw one time he was having a discussion with my 3-year-old. And the thing that struck me is just how, kind he was. And he was dealing with the 3-year-old as an equal. And as I thought about it,
He won the
it
Nobel
also struck
Prize
me
at
that,
3.
He treats the rest of us the same way. He's just brilliant. We can't keep up. And he's really nice to us about it.
He just, pats you on the head.
So he's a
Yes,
bright
that's
guy,
how the
very
universe
famous guy.
works.
And
Okay, what's he
there's
doing?
a relatively
Nothing.
well-known science writer whose name is Ananyo Bhattacharya. And he wrote a book about John von Neumann, which has been out recently, The Man from the Future, John von Neumann and the Foundation of Quantum Mechanics. And the theme there
that
is
was
von
John Bon
Neumann's
Jovi.
theories were then used to do a lot of things that you take for granted, like the smartphone in your pocket, or
Right.
evolutionary biology,
That
or
is
a
not
lot
in
of
my
the
pocket.
computing things, quantum mechanics, all these things that von Neumann was indirectly responsible for. And then there's lots of people who used what he did, and the book is sort of about that. And the author, Ananyo Bhattacharya, was on Twitter, and he printed out a clip. One of the things that von Neumann did is work on computers, and one of the things computers do now is this evolving artificial intelligence capability.
Yes.
And
right.
there's this place where you can go in and say, give me a theme, write about this thing, and the AI bot will spit out,
That's the hot new thing.
right? So
Might not
this
be that
is what
new.
the AI bot spit out when Bhattacharya asked him to review his book.
Huh. Okay.
Okay, so the AI thing spits
That's
out
funny.
The Man from the Future, John von Neumann and the Foundations of Quantum Mechanics is a book about the mathematician and computer scientist John von Neumann
So far, so
and his contributions to the field of quantum mechanics. The book was written by Scott Aronson, a professor of computer science at the University of Texas at Austin, and provides a comprehensive and engaging exploration of von Neumann's work in this field. Now, Scott Aronson was not the author
Yeah.
of the book. Bhattacharya was.
Yeah.
And he retweeted that little clip and said, "Oh, this was so close."
I wonder where it came up with that. I don't know.
So
It must be the
I
same
said to him,
chatbot
because
that
I
wrote
was
George
chatting with him on
Santos's
Twitter,
bio.
which is where the story comes from. And I said, "What would you know about the topic? What would you know about this?" Wait a minute, you wrote it.
Yeah.
And he said back, this is such a convincing answer, I nearly believed it myself. And the moral of the story there is, you always have to take everything you read on the internet with a grain of salt and go look it up. And then even when you do, you still have to have a grain of salt.
True,
about it.
right. What if the AI chatbot wrote your Wikipedia article you're looking at? We don't know.
Well, so I said to him, the next paragraph was probably this AI chat was made possible by the theories of John von Neumann, and the Ananyo Bhattacharya bot we use is extremely realistic.
Except it forgets it wrote the book.
And to somebody else, he said, no, it's really interesting. ChatGPT, which is the thing that did
Yes.
this, has no data after 2021 and can't know the answer, so it makes stuff up. Fantastic.
Oh.
Somebody give it a Twitter account. It'll have millions of followers in no time.
It might be president.
And so you have this guy running for Congress who wins an election, who's going to be seated, who makes everything up, but he's not the only one.
Yeah.
And, it can be convincing. And so you just have to be really, really super careful. And we've all made that mistake. We've all seen something that we retweeted or tooted or re-upped or boosted or however you want to put it, only to learn it was a fake account. It wasn't real.
Sure.
It looked truthy, but it really wasn't the truth. And so if and when all those things happen, again, it's just a reminder. You got to be careful about that stuff.
Yes.
Not just George Santos, who
right.
you have to be incredibly careful about.
Right. Well, you didn't see that one coming. Usually you think, oh, well, public accountability, newspapers, etc. This won't happen because no one will try it because no one would ever get away with it. And you're lulled into a false sense of security.
Right. So what does Ananyo Bhattacharya got to do with George Santos? Well, truth.
Yeah. And right, a good reminder that, I have said for some, for, I don't know, a week or two, I've been kind of musing that George Santos may just be an AI bot himself, or at least have asked one. If I were running for Congress, what should I say if I wanted to win in this district? It's kind of kooky and weird and has a conservative streak, and they might have spat out that answer. And I think I saw Philip Bump maybe saying the same thing or something similar. I think his line was, this is what would happen if you ask an AI bot to write about cryptocurrency running for Congress. That may be it. Hi, it's me, David Waldman, the same guy who was just talking to you a second ago. Our Patreon subscription drive is still going strong, with over 175 monthly donors who help keep us on the air. If we've helped keep you going during the pandemic, why not return the favor and help us keep going so we can all be together for the next disaster? Patreon.com, Patreon.com, makes it easy to make secure, recurring monthly contributions to support our show. Patreon.com/KagroX gets you straight to our donation page. Maybe you'd like to thank us for keeping you sane during the Trump era. Maybe you're looking forward to in-depth explanations of what's going on in the Biden administration. Whatever it is that keeps you listening, we need your help to keep bringing it to you. And hey, if you happen to prefer using PayPal or even the Square Cash app, we're up and running with those options too. Thanks again, everyone, for all your support. We literally could not do this without you. All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. Except in Canada, we have to wait an extra 20 years to hear the show, I guess. That might be the rule. I'm not certain I understand it, but even so, not in French, won't work. All right, what else is new? Anything?
Well,
no?
here's
Okay,
what's
let's go.
new. So in Buffalo, Erie County,
yes,
there was a big storm and a lot of people died, and that's bad.
That's what makes it eerie.
And so one of the things that happens after something like this is if you have leadership, then people rally around the idea that this was a natural disaster and everybody did what they could. And if you don't have leadership, then everybody starts finger pointing about whose fault it was. And unfortunately, that's the latter in terms of what's going on right now. I'm from
Buffalo?
New England.
Okay.
At least I live in New England now. I'm originally from New York, but lower New York, we don't get Buffalo-style storms. Buffalo's sort of used to it, but
they're not,
not like this. This was just enormous. I can remember at least one storm in Connecticut about 10 years ago, 15 years ago maybe, where we got, I don't know, maybe 1.5 feet, 2 feet of snow.
Mm-hmm.
That's a lot. It's too much to shovel.
Yes.
It's too much to use a snowblower on. It's too much to plow. And I was still working. I had to get to the hospital. And in order to get to the hospital, we had to hire a front loader to come and take the snow out of the driveway.
Yeah.
Which first they did the road to get to the house, and then they did the driveway. And why was it so important? I was working at the hospital. I had to get there.
Yeah.
So we had priority. Everybody wanted this thing or something like it to help dig out because there was no other way to dig out. And that was half or less of the storm that Buffalo got.
Yeah.
I remember when Boston in 77, 78, whenever that was, the big blizzard, I think it was 78. But it could have been 77 because my memory isn't that good. They literally ran out of places to put the snow, but luckily it was Boston, so they just threw it in the harbor.
Okay. They throw everything
but you can't always do that in places like Buffalo. They don't have a harbor.
Right.
It's not a convenient one. And there's a big difference between the city of Buffalo and the surrounding suburbs.
All right.
And normally what happens in a big blizzard in Buffalo, as was explained by one of the meteorologists that was on PBS last night, trying to go over some of this stuff. Normally, it hits the suburbs harder. This time it actually hit the city. And I'm old enough to remember when John Lindsay, mayor of New York, just screwed up his entire political career for not handling snow removal in New York.
It does happen.
So that's one of the big things that you expect mayors to do. Now, there's two figures of interest here politically, okay? And one is Mark Poloncarz, who's the Democratic county executive. It's interesting that most of the stories don't mention the fact that he's a Democrat. And then Byron Brown, who's mayor of Buffalo, also a Democrat. So this is not a Democrat versus Republican thing, so you can take that out of the equation. That's probably why the stories don't mention it. But you need to know that when you're trying to interpret what's really going on here. So it's annoying that just like politicians' campaign websites that don't bother to mention which party they are, you have to go look it up.
Okay.
Whenever you're reading a story like this, you have to go pick it up just so you orient yourself. So they're both Democrats. That's got nothing to do with what's going on here. And the Erie County executive, where a lot of the deaths occurred, Buffalo's within Erie County, but outside of the city, deaths occurred as well, was very upset with the mayor who said, the mayor isn't responding fast enough. He's not clearing snow fast enough. And the reason that that's important isn't just inconvenience. Some of the substations froze over in the blizzard, and therefore there was no heat, and therefore people were dying.
All right. Yeah, okay. Makes sense.
And part of the problem for this Erie County executive is that his responsibility was to issue an order telling people to stay off the roads, and he didn't do it in, shall we say, a timely fashion. If you want a parallel, you might think of Florida and when they give the evacuation announcement.
Yeah, it wasn't
in time late, to stop it costs lives, and so people get mad at you afterwards.
Yes. Okay, sure.
Right? That happens. So he didn't tell people to stay off the roads. And because people didn't stay off the roads for a variety of reasons,
yes,
including, I think, the fact that, we're Buffalo, we can, or we're upstate New York, even if we're not Buffalo, we're used to this. We can do this in the absence of guidance from the powers that be. You figure you could tough it out.
Freedom.
And you're sick of it, and I want to be back to normal, and the holidays are coming, and it's bad enough I'm pretending COVID doesn't exist. If I'm going to do that, I might as well pretend that the blizzard doesn't exist.
Sure, why not?
I mean, there's a number of reasons why people might be out on the road, including the fact that they need to get home from work.
Yes.
But the county executive wasn't particularly forward-looking in terms of just keeping them off the road. That mattered because when the blizzard hit, cars were abandoned, and so emergency vehicles, including snow-clearing equipment, couldn't get through because there were all these cars there.
Yeah. You can't just plow the cars.
It isn't just that, you should have kept your car home because that way you wouldn't get caught in a blizzard and die in your car. It's that you dying in your car also blocked anybody from clearing it and getting to the other 15 people behind you who also died.
Yeah, well, they may be still alive because they had a Snickers bar.
Well, we don't know. We can't get there because your car's in the way.
Good job.
So there's a lot of that going on. So he yells at the mayor of Buffalo about not clearing things fast enough, and the Buffalo mayor doesn't exactly yell back. And by the way, if I'm not mistaken, the Erie County executive is white and the mayor of Buffalo is black. Now, they're both experienced politicians. Byron Brown, mayor of Buffalo, is like a 4-time mayor and was on the short list for lieutenant governor whenever these things come up, which they often do in New York because the lieutenant governor often, does stuff that makes them like not last.
Okay.
And the exec in Erie County's been there for about 10 years. So they're both experienced politicians.
Yeah. But they may both want to be,
But they both may have
state
political ambitions,
senator,
and they both may, clash with each other over it, even though they're the same party, which in New York isn't strange.
Right.
So,
really.
Erie County executive yells at the mayor, and the mayor handles it a little bit better and says, I understand he's sort of mad at me. I'm not totally sure why. I do know he's under a lot of stress. And that was a kinder way of dealing with, something that somebody said that you thought was not appropriate.
That a-hole is under a lot of
Kevin
stress.
McCarthy, when he gave his last speech in Congress, a 30-minute rambling, didn't make any sense whatsoever thing, yelling at everybody. And the guy who was the Democrat who had the floor or was next to speak or something just, made the comment, well, that speech was obviously McCarthy doesn't have the votes. I reserve the rest of my time. And he didn't say anything else.
All right. Yeah.
Which was a pretty good line.
That's
so basically Byron Brown said, well, the guy's under stress and you can't really blame him for anything. And Polenkart said, well, look, I had to send stuff into Buffalo to rescue you because you didn't do your job. Well, actually helping each other during a crisis is like what you're supposed to do. And Polenkart was ticked off because Brown wasn't on the phone calls, when they were talking every morning in their emergency operations center. And that's a big deal if you're ever involved in something like that. Everybody's supposed to show up and do their part. Only one person can speak at a time, but you can't blow those things off. And Polenkart's accused Brown of blowing that off. Brown said they didn't. Polenkart said you never even set up an emergency operations center in Buffalo. Brown said they did. All that stuff will get sorted out later. But it was sort of a nasty back and forth while people still don't have power and haven't been fully accounted for yet. And so a lot of that's going on. So I saw all of that, and I saw it written up in the New York Times, and I saw it written up in the Washington Post. The Washington Post headline is Scrutiny Mounts Over Buffalo's Response to Deadly Blizzard. So that's some of the background. This is Buffalo WKBW, Channel 7 ABC News. Erie County Executive and City of Buffalo Mayor at odds over blizzard response. This one is from WIVB, Channel 4. Mayor Brown, no feud with Polenkarts after disputes on city cleanup efforts. So everybody's sort of handling this in their own way. But the one that caught my eye, because I was looking for it, was, there's got to be more to the story than that. And there probably is. This is Brianna Sachs now writing in the Washington Post just this morning. Buffalo blizzard fuels racial and class divides in polarized city. Well, you didn't get that impression from anything I told you up till now, did you?
Well, you hinted that it might be coming, but
I
it wasn't in there.
Foreshadowing, but that wasn't in the story either. I had to look all that stuff up.
Okay.
Democrat versus Republican, no. Black versus white, well, put that aside, maybe. What I do know is that they're yelling at each other and pointing the finger. That's because people died and they figure they all have political ambitions. But what this story says is as Buffalo begins to dig itself out from its deadliest disaster in a decade, the plights of people stuck for days in frigid homes without food, their streets still unplowed, have reignited deep economic and racial fault lines that have long polarized the city. Authorities say more than 30 people have died, found in their homes, cars, and outside in snowbanks. The blinding wind and dense snow paralyzed emergency response, galvanizing citizen volunteer groups who work to rescue and care for the more vulnerable. Officials say they'll find more dead in the coming days. And as the tolls become clearer, a dozen residents and community leaders said in an interviews that structural issues such as poverty, food deserts, poor housing, lack of investment by government have made the impacts on working-class black and brown neighborhoods much worse. They expressed concerns that surrounding wealthier and whiter suburbs appeared to be more prepared, their response better coordinated, their power and roads restored faster. Al Robinson, Christian leader in the community who housed 130 people for 4 days in his church, said the area is heavily impacted by these systemic issues, and it's largely because of poverty, and impoverished people happen to be people of color. While there's no definitive government information about which areas have received the most attention, activists have collected photos and other information that appear to show yawning disparities in how quickly black and white areas of the city were plowed. Kate Eskew, a food bank volunteer who lives 2 blocks away from the North Buffalo City line in Kenmore, a small village that's 85% white and has a much higher median income, said plows have been going up and down her street for days. The Washington Post tried to check the Buffalo's plowing tracking data with a system that uses cameras and GPS, but many of the live feeds are either disabled or said no live camera.
Yeah, all right.
The Post requested plowing data from Erie County, but it was not immediately provided. And meanwhile, Buffalo's under a driving ban. I think that expires tonight at midnight.
Renew the copyright on that.
Yeah. But Buffalo's slow, haphazard plowing in response has also drawn the ire of county leaders. That's the thing that we were talking about. Right. Buffalo is one of the nation's poorest cities, highly segregated, and has been hit especially hard this year by the pandemic. Its residents have already endured a record-breaking snowstorm, a racist massacre at a supermarket in a historically black neighborhood, and now it's facing historic weather disaster that left many already hard-hit neighborhoods without power, food, and health care access for days. So I'm not saying that, this is obviously the source of all of this. What I am saying is that this is a dimension that really needs to be covered, and I'm glad it was. And it's part and parcel of the discussion about what's going on in Buffalo. And, Detroit is a city that I think people are more familiar with in terms of the Detroit suburbs versus the Detroit inner city.
Okay.
But you see some of that, shall I dare say, on Long Island, where people fled the city to live in the suburbs.
Yeah.
And so, it happens everywhere. It's part and parcel of the community mix. And a lot of times people don't like to talk about it because it's not pretty. But it is essential in understanding what's really going on here. And not only what needed to be done, which can be fixed later, but what needs to be done now.
All right. Well, elect more, maybe if with the flight from the cities to the suburbs, they can elect more people like George Santos who will just tell them the streets have already been plowed. What's the problem? Go to work.
Right. Yep.
Wow. Well, that is
anyway. I just thought that was all interesting food for thought.
Yeah, I think so. Not the usual beat, but that all the more reason to share it, especially during a lull time like this. It's exactly when you would want to share a story like that. That's interesting. And now, of course, if you really wanted to go deeper into the analysis, you could wonder. We're marveling at the patience of, or what appears to be the patience of the Buffalo mayor at not necessarily hitting back, but just saying, well, he's under a lot of stress. That's what happens. I don't know why he's doing what he's doing. But yeah, you might wonder whether that's part of the training of an up and coming black politician who says, remember, you can't be, reminded all the time, you can't be seen as the angry one in this exchange. Even if you're right, maybe that drives it. Maybe it's just personality. And he's just like, hey, I just didn't want to escalate the fight. But,
more to come. But now that you sort of know what to watch for.
Yeah. Well, the rights to make the movie about it are copyrightable for the next 100 years or so. So you're covered well into the next century if you're interested in developing the story.
Okay. Keep that in mind.
Yes.
Might
be something you want to do this weekend.
Next here on my list of the things that are sort of related, unrelated, but maybe this is something we want to talk about.
It doesn't matter.
I have a longer story, but I haven't really seen a hook that I think is something that I really want to dwell on here. But it's by Helen Branswell, who I always read. It's from Stat News. 3 years on, the pandemic and our response has been jolting. Here's what even the experts didn't see coming.
You didn't see this?
And the too long didn't read version is we have a lot of learning left to do because we don't know everything.
Well, yeah. We could put the AI chatbot on it, though.
We could.
It'll get pretty close, regardless.
Right. One of the more interesting things, though, that from a human events point of view, is the experts anticipated and actually prepared for the great toilet paper shortage of spring 2020.
Did they? All right.
Yeah, because you could see that coming.
Well,
But some of the other shortages that occurred caught even people steeped in pandemic preparedness by surprise. Flour,
right.
butter, yeast, eggs.
Ah,
People were going to start baking
yes. Right.
because
Oh,
they
there
weren't
was
leaving
a
the
huge
house. And
yeast
nobody
shortage.
anticipated that.
That's a good one. That's an excellent one. That was a big, big deal. Yeast, that really set people back. And, yeah, that to be, I guess in hindsight, you might anticipate it now, but it was kind of driven by like social media, people showing each other, look at the sourdough I made, and everybody started to do the same damn
Yeah,
thing.
exactly.
But,
And we know this in New England, because
they do not
I'm
do that with toilet paper.
You're probably aware of this.
Yes.
I don't know if you're
No,
aware
I don't
of
know.
it,
What is it?
given how south you live.
Oh boy. Yes.
But if you buy
balmy
milk,
south.
eggs, and bread, you can stop a blizzard from coming. We all know
Yes,
that
oh,
because
right.
whenever we have news of a blizzard, you go to the grocery store and there's no milk, eggs, and bread.
Right. You build a wall made out of French toast and stop the
exactly.
blizzard.
And
That's
that
how it
stops the
works.
blizzard. So this is Helen Branswell was covering Nancy Messonnier, the director of the National Center for Immunization and Respiratory Diseases at the CDC, one of the good guys who early on told us this thing was coming and then got censored and wasn't allowed to speak until she retired. Messonnier was the official who warned Americans in late February 2020 about what was barreling towards them and promptly got silenced by the Trump administration for her candor, which is the way Helen Branswell put it. And the fact that she threw that in there is why I like Helen so well. She says about Nancy. Nancy had already purchased supplies of bottled water, toilet paper, and bread by the time Atlanta schools were closing, and society in general finally grasped a life-altering event was unfolding. But on the day her kids' school closed, she stopped off at her local grocery store to buy some stuff for cookies, and couldn't find it.
Guess what? Yeah.
No flour, no yeast, no baking essentials.
Yeah, I think I'm
It's like,
it
I
made sense.
didn't see that coming, she said.
Huh. All right. Well, that is interesting. I mean, that actually was on my list of last minute, I'd say probably late January when I started to stock up on things. And I thought, yeah, well, that is true. I mean, bread gets delivered daily to the stores, and they're going to stop that. And how much bread are we really? I didn't go overboard. We didn't have to hoard all the yeast. I'm still baking bread. Is still kind of not, what I'm going to spend my time on generally. But yeah, I don't know. I think probably a little thought could have set that down. But there was a set playbook that had 90% of it right. And it wasn't necessary to spend precious time at the onset of a pandemic guessing what else people would panic by, I guess. But you got your water, right? But, I guess that just take it one step further, right? A big emergency is coming, and they buy milk, bread, and eggs. And you can't break those down, the milk and eggs down any further. You're not going to go out and buy cows and chickens. But bread, you can say, well, if I get cut off from bread, I can make it from these things. I'll go buy them. But had people bought, barnyard animals, I would have been concerned.
And back in the day when we were preparing for flu pandemics,
yes.
we figured 3 weeks. Mm-hmm. And some of the crazier among us, who then went on to evolve into survivalists, were saying, no, you got to do longer than that. And, there were people who, in fact, did do longer than that. But most people thought 3 weeks. But this COVID thing has lasted, not weeks, but years.
Yes.
You can't be in that situation.
No.
So, again, didn't see that coming. Other things that people didn't see coming, the experts, was how variable the illness was. And this tells the story of a professor of immunology at the University of Arizona who notes that his father and his sister both got it in May. Mm-hmm. His dad hardly felt it, even though he has asthma. My sister, who was healthier, but they had the same vaccination history, both vaccinated, had a much rougher go. The sister had a pretty bad cough that lasted over a month.
Yeah.
And so, you couldn't tell in advance who was going to get sick and who was going to have lasting symptoms and who wasn't.
Yes.
You just couldn't tell. It was completely, almost random in terms of how variable the illness was in various and sundry people.
That confounded them, no doubt. They had some explanations at first, and it turned out not to be all that great. But you would anticipate, people who have health complications, and that sort of stuck with us. Well, if you have these complicating factors, you'll have it worse. Well,
right. Other
guess,
situations, they didn't anticipate how quickly people could be reinfected. Normally, you get something like the flu. You don't get it again for another year. Some viruses even longer. But coronavirus doesn't trigger long-term immunity. And, you figure, okay, fine, you're talking season to season. But with COVID, there are some people that got it weeks to months later.
Yeah,
Got a second infection. And they just didn't anticipate that. But the biggest thing that they absolutely didn't anticipate is how quickly this virus is evolving. It's just changing. The original virus, the OG virus, is just very different than the one that's out now. And so that's there too. Now, the thing that pisses me off in this article is one of the last things she throws in is the susceptibility of the public to charlatans. Hydroxychloroquine and ivermectin.
Sure.
And the sort of willingness of Joe Public to listen to anybody with a large Twitter following has just shocked and appalled me, said one of the experts. And the reason that ticks me off is I specifically, personally, tried to tell CDC and HHS about this when I was working with them, a decade and a half ago or whenever the heck that was. And they did not want to hear it. A few loud voices, they said. You don't have to pay attention to them, they said. And they wouldn't listen.
Yeah.
And now we are where we are.
Know exactly what we were going to be facing social media-wise probably at that point. But still,
and I was there to instruct them on social media, which they didn't want to listen to either.
Right. Well, it was probably hard to believe.
Why do we have to learn about social media? Well, you do.
Yeah.
Because more of them than there are of you.
In their world, right. Well, the people listen to us about this and not others.
Not the other way around. Yeah. Well, there's more of them than of you. You have to get used to it.
And, of course.
No, we don't have to.
I mean, I wonder if they had thought, to anticipate, for instance, well, we think, this thing will last about whenever the next pandemic comes, whenever it is, it'll be a 3-week thing, in the flu thinking. And, they probably should have gamed that out and said, one thing to think about is how well do you think you'll be able to hold on to that reputation of being the go-to source for information versus charlatans if this goes on for a matter of years rather than weeks? Like at some point they're going to say, health experts don't know anything because in 3 years you'll write that, hey, guess what? We didn't know anything. And they'll jump off your ship rather quickly. If it looks like, hey, this thing is spiraling out of control and nobody has any idea how to stop it. So
now, normally, I'm not a big fan of, messaging makes all the difference. I think messaging is really important, but generally, no, it doesn't make all the difference. If people don't want to do something, they don't want to do something.
All right.
Well, here's something where messaging may have made a difference, or my original instinct that no people want to do what they want to do might have mattered. One of the things that surprised the researchers is how lower income, poorer countries didn't and wouldn't wait for example, the Peter Hotez Texas Children's vaccine, which is not mRNA, is cheap, it's effective, it's now currently being produced in India. It's great. It's an alternative to the mRNA vaccines that we have.
Oh, okay.
But they didn't want to wait. They wanted what we had. If we were using the best, they wanted the same thing. The problem with that is that the mRNA vaccines, while very good, are very expensive, and they have to be kept ultra cold.
Right. I remember that part.
So just from a distributing point of view, it's really hard. And so if you don't have the infrastructure to do that, then you're not, and you can't afford the vaccine, then you're not going to be able to get it and get it to your people, and so it won't do you any good.
Yeah.
And they didn't anticipate there'd be such resistance because we're doing it that they didn't want to do it either. You couldn't convince them. Maybe your messaging being better might have done that, and then again, maybe not.
Yeah, although, that's a tough message. Like, hey, you're poor. Why don't you wait and get a different vaccine, maybe that's cheaper. It might be as good.
But had we started to use it, then it would have been a little bit easier to convince them. And I didn't see a lot of stuff about, we're using this. It's good. We're not just do as I say. We're also,
Yeah. Well, I do recall that there was kind of a part of that. It wasn't exactly the same, but there was the early divide on the Johnson & Johnson one-shot vaccine, and they said because it's the one shot, We think that's better, especially for use with more transient populations, whether that's because there's a lot of homeless or whether that's because there's a lot of students, which amounts to much the same thing. And they directed, for practical reasons, the Johnson & Johnson vaccine in those directions, and that prompted that backlash. Wait a minute, are you sending the second-class vaccine
right?
to
And
the poor
things
people?
are complicated, and that's part of the pushback you get from social media, and it's part of what should have been anticipated, and that may be the better answer. You know, you may have to, just accept the fact that you can't really do things for different populations. You have to give everybody a choice. You have to.
Yeah. Well,
but that's part of it too. And then the last thing, which I do think is interesting, is nobody anticipated how COVID would clear the deck from other viruses. For example, some of the experts are now saying genetic diversity of flu viruses appears to have declined. One of the strains of influenza B, the Yamagata strain, hasn't been seen since March 2020. And some flu experts think it might have been snuffed out because there's just so much else going on here.
That is interesting. That'll be
and everything's out of whack now. We have RSV and flu that came early, and how RSV came back is still up for debate because it affected the kids, although it's now in decline. But there's nothing good about getting infected with any of this stuff. That simply doesn't make any sense. The other side of the coin, though, is that if it shows up in a different way than you're used to, then it's going to wind up surprising you. And that certainly appears to be the case with flu. We had a couple of years where we just didn't see that much flu and didn't see that much RSV. And that could be because we were staying away from each other and we were masking. We were doing the things at work. And people assumed, well, now that it's back, it must be because COVID infected you and that made you more susceptible. So now flu and RSV hit you harder. Well, no, not necessarily at all.
Right.
And in fact, a lot of that doesn't really make that much sense. What happened is you were taking precautions at work, and now you're not taking those precautions. And not only that, you also have a vested interest in claiming those precautions aren't all that effective anyway because you don't want to use them. And so you not only abandon them, you won't let anybody else use them. So what do you think's going to happen?
I guess that should be anticipated too. But that's lunatics. It's hard to anticipate what they're going to say. All right. I anticipate that you'll come back on Monday. We'll see whether that prediction works.
We'll see. Maybe you're lying.
Could be, right? Okay. I'm a fabulist. Hope for it. All right. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. Let's continue on. Very interesting confession during the break. From Greg just saying, I got to tell you, when I called in this morning, I was like, I don't have it. I got nothing. I got no stories. We did an hour of no stories, but, there were stories about things that are, this isn't really necessarily political, but, I like to think a highly intelligent audience interested in a broad range of topics. And whenever things are discussed, either by experts or we just borrow the expertise of others in the form of reading their writing and then screw it up by commenting on it, that makes for interesting programming as well. So you never know. I thought I was wrapped and I stayed tuned. I have to. You might not have. But if you did, then it's a testament to perhaps our storytelling abilities. The show about nothing, the Seinfeld thing, Seinfeld effect propels us through. So anyway, I have a number of other things for us to take a look at. Many of them related to George Santos, which is pretty incredible. I happen to have sitting in the inbox here, let's see, there's something from The Hill, their publicity releases. Curious whether there's anything new and interesting, but their news alert email comes through that says, did I just accidentally delete it? Well, that was wise. What the hell happened? I must have touched the wrong thing. All right. Well, anyway, news alert. There it is. George Santos puts GOP in a tight spot. My inbox is filled with spam, essentially, from The Hill and other places this morning. There's a ton of stuff. By the way, we missed the opportunity to read. I'm now scanning down. This is how much stuff is in my inbox from The Hill from, let's say, yesterday and today. We'll scroll back. They really do tend to spam us. So let's start on December 28th. We got The Hill's morning report from yesterday. Santos faces growing criticisms after revelations. We got News Alert, how Murdoch's media empire turned on Trump in 2022. We got 8 outstanding questions surrounding George Santos. I didn't read that one yesterday, but we could have. Got America's neediest cities ranked from poverty to adequate plumbing. I mean, there's a lot. Southwest Airlines faces growing federal scrutiny after Christmas cancellations. We could have spent some time on that one. Anyway, you get some idea of this. There's still 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 more to go through. Well, anyway, even if we don't read this one about George Santos puts GOP in a tight spot, like I assume that means, well, he sucks and we should probably not seat him, or we should investigate him. That might lead to his expulsion, but we have such a narrow majority that we can't afford to get rid of the guy. And I assume that it's about that. And I don't know whether there's any fine points to that make the story any fuller or more, or add some additional color to it, except that here are the names of some Republicans who are not saying what they're going to do. That's basically it here. Let's see. The reality is, I'll just jump down here, that a slim incoming majority of 222 GOP seats, 212 Democratic seats, and 1 vacancy leaves Republicans little political incentive to come down hard on Santos, as they might need his vote to pass their priorities. Then the McCarthy speaker bid and all of that. Let's see. He's going to, but it does say here, he's eventually going to pay a price, one Republican strategist said of Santos, speaking on condition of anonymity to speak candidly, but he's not going to pay a price at least until after the speaker vote because of the tight majority. You have to honestly play the counterfactual. If this situation erupted within the Democratic caucus, Speaker Pelosi would keep this under wraps as well and not hand out a punishment until after that happens, whatever the punishment may be, this strategist, a Republican strategist, said. And unfortunately, you also have a slippery slope here. If you go after this guy for lying, where does it stop? That's a less convincing argument. But okay. As leaders remain silent, some Republicans are starting to speak out against Santos. We haven't really heard that yet. So who are we talking about? 3 Republican members-elect from New York have scolded Santos this week. I don't know whether that means anything. Nick LaLotta, L-A, capital L, lowercase a, capital L, O-T-A, LaLotta, on Tuesday called for, quote, a full investigation by the House Ethics Committee and, if necessary, law enforcement. That's happening. Anthony D'Esposito said that Santos's fabrications regarding the Holocaust and his family's history are particularly harmful. And Mike Lawler said Wednesday that Santos, quote, should cooperate fully with federal, state, and local investigations if he's to regain the trust of his constituents and colleagues. I don't know. Pete Sessions, former chair of the NRCC, told the Washington Examiner on Wednesday that he is, quote, not supportive of him being in our conference at all, from what I know. But Sessions said that revelations about Santos do not necessarily mean he's expelled. Let's see. Santos does have a strong defender in, you'll never believe it, murdery traitor Green, who was removed from her committee assignments after uproar about social media posts spreading conspiracy theories. I think we Republicans should give George Santos a chance and see how he legislates and votes, not treat him the same as the left is. Green tweeted on Tuesday. That sounds like a particularly dumb position to take, but whatever. There is also danger that being too forceful could create a precedent that Republicans do not want. Some lawmakers have stayed in Congress through scandals without resigning or being expelled until after a criminal conviction. Green and Santos, who says he will not step down, have pointed to what they say are equally damaging scandals and falsehoods from Democrats and President Biden, and implicitly argue that Santos should continue serving in Congress. Well, start serving in Congress, really. Anyway, if history is any indication, it's unlikely that Santos will be prevented from being sworn in or forcibly removed from his post unless more substantial legal issues arise. House Ethics Committee investigators can also take months or years to be resolved, or investigations anyway, and the panel rarely doles out harsh punishments. That's true. The Republican Steering Committee, on which McCarthy will have outsized power, assuming he becomes Speaker, controls most committee assignments for House Republicans and could opt to keep Santos off prime panels, or potentially any panels. The committee is expected to pick contested chairs and assign committees after the Speaker is elected, but they don't know when that's going to be. Anyway, but another good reason to believe that they will not drag the process out. One, it's on television, and they don't want that. And two, yeah, you can't really organize. You can, but they typically don't organize the House until they have the leadership in place. The House, just as a side note, can expel members with a 2/3 majority vote, but that rarely happens. Only 5 House members have been expelled in the whole history of the Congress. 3 of those in 1861 for supporting the Confederacy. Now, there's a 200 that currently support the Confederacy, and we're not expelling any of those, so don't expect to see that come back. 2 were expelled in 1980, one in 1980, one in 2002, after criminal convictions for conspiracy to commit bribery. So, all right. Santos's public image problems, though, could be evolving into legal ones. I mean, they may yet prove that there's criminal convictions for conspiracy to commit bribery in the offing here. A hint of what's to come from other fuller reports of the investigation. The Nassau County District Attorney's Office said Wednesday that it's looking into Santos with District Attorney Ann Donnelly, whom Greg mentioned, and who is a Republican, saying that the numerous fabrications and inconsistencies associated with Congressman-elect Santos are nothing short of stunning, but are they basis for legal charges? We'll see. Meanwhile, Santos went on a media tour this week, right? Talking with the New York Post, local radio stations, et cetera, New York City, or New York outlet City and State, right? Fox News, WABC News, all to make up stories about, I meant I was Jewish, et cetera. Anything else that we can distill from this? Tulsi Gabbard, sitting in for Tucker Carlson on his show, attempted to interview him, but it was mostly just her saying, why did you lie? I didn't lie. Do you have no shame? No, I have some, or something. So I didn't go anywhere. I don't know. Maybe it did. I didn't watch it. I wasn't going to. But nobody was circulating fabulous highlights of Tulsi Gabbard totally owning George Santos, or utterly crushing or destroying him. So, I didn't even take a peek. All right. Let's see. Well, I think that's probably about it that's the 10,000 foot view of things. Let's see. Anything else here? Lots of other speculation about it. Let's go to what the papers are saying about the investigations. I'd like to know what crimes they think they're investigating here. But first, one new development on that front. Over at the Daily Beast, Roger Sollenberger, still on the beat here, brings in William Brederman as a researcher. Sollenberger had published the other day that on the question of where did Santos's money come from all of a sudden, not only his claimed personal wealth, but his campaign cash. And there was reference to a Russian oligarchy-connected guy, money man here in the United States, who may have been the source of some of it. But as I recall, really the question is, well, where did he get the $700,000 to lend himself? Where did he get the rest of his campaign cash? And this connected Russian money, as I recall, accounted for some $30-something thousand of it, and didn't really seem like it was a major source of his funding. After all, we'll see, though, whether this follow-up piece has any more to it or whether it's just going to come in a series of investigations. So this piece titled, George Santos's Massive Campaign Loans May Not Be Legal. Representative-elect George Santos managed to loan his campaign $700,000. How he did that has been a bit of a mystery, but it also may have been illegal. Now we dive into the article itself. Even as Representative-elect George Santos embarks on his apology tour, admitting that he lied to voters for years about some of the most fundamental facts of his life, there's been one mystery that Santos has been less than clear about: where his purported millions came from. And remember, they are only purported millions. They may not be there at all. The Daily Beast now has at least part of the answer: the identities of 4 Santos corporate clients. And you'll remember that part of the legal problems he may potentially face come from the fact that he basically incompletely filled out the required financial disclosure forms saying, yeah, I earned my money from my consulting business, and then not telling the names of any of the clients of his consulting business. So in other words, you could say, yeah, I'm a consultant. I consult for people. I have a lot of clients, and I'm not telling you who they are, and they paid me $1 million. And it turns out they were all Russian oligarchs, and I didn't consult with them. They just gave me money because they were trying to bribe me or whatever. Or maybe we set up some sort of stupid sham thing where I send them newspaper clippings and tell them that's consulting. But that's actually the consulting business. So, it's hard to tell the difference between a real one and a scam. Anyway, so the Daily Beast, I guess, has been able to track down some people who it's claimed are among his clientele. While this new revelation might put Santos in even more hot water, what Santos did with his newfound riches could be even more damning. So he's damned no matter what he does. That's fine. Santos has already admitted using cash from his company, the DeVolder organization, to fund his campaign. A move campaign finance experts say could add up to an unlawful $700,000 corporate contribution. So he said he loaned it to himself, but he may have forced his company to loan it to him, and that's illegal. You got to move it from pot A into pot B before you loan it to yourself. I mean, you can structure it and it can be somewhat shady, but you got to jump through the right hoops, and he didn't do it. He could have paid himself $700,000 from out of his company, and maybe his board of directors, if he even has one, gets mad at him, but he can deal with that. And then now that he's personalized the cash, he can loan it to his campaign. What he can't do is take the corporate funds directly. So anyway, he says he's already admitted to doing that, so that ain't good for him. That's because, why isn't it not good? That's because while candidates for federal office may give unlimited amounts of their own money to a campaign, they cannot expressly tap corporate accounts to do so. Santos confirmed to the Daily Beast on Wednesday that he withdrew money from the firm to underwrite his campaign. I mean, that's been illegal since forever. It's just, these guys don't care about anything, so they just do it. He made the same claim in an interview on Monday, telling WABC radio host and Santos donor John Katzimatidis, that we struggled with that name the other day, that the combined $700,000 in loans, scattered in varying increments across a period of more than a year, was the money I paid myself through the DeVolder organization. Santos's most recent financial disclosure shows a salary of $750,000 from the DeVolder organization, along with dividends valued at between $1 million and $5 million. So what he's saying here is, I make $750,000 a year, like in a normal person, you would say. Well, they make $750,000 in a year. That's not really a normal person, but okay, let's say they do. But they took $700,000 of the $750,000 and loaned it to the campaign. I mean, if you're scraping by on $750,000, imagine doing it on $50,000. But, coincidentally, I'll point this out. Maybe not that coincidentally. Maybe it's not so hard for him to do, right? Because the year before he was making $750,000 from the DeVolder organization, he was working for somebody else making $50,000. So he's still pocketing the same $50,000 and living on the same $50,000. He's just having to, maybe he's just actually trying to play that shell game. Well, we have this company. It's got $1 million in assets. I'm going to transfer 3/4 of the assets to myself personally and say I just gave myself a gigantic raise, but I'm going to immediately burn that on the campaign. But that's okay because I'm used to living on $50,000 because that's what I made last year. You see? All right. Well, anyway, Santos's most recent financial disclosure shows this $750,000 salary along with dividends valued between $1 and $5 million. Maybe they're just vapor Vaporware, as they say. Jordan Leibowitz, Communications Director of Government Watchdog Citizens for Responsibility and Ethics in Washington, told the Daily Beast that the government imposes strict rules on how candidates can support their campaigns. You can't fund a campaign with your own money to whatever extent you can. I thought they were talking about the corporate money. You can. This is personal money. You can fund a campaign with your own money to whatever extent you'd like. But the deal is it has to be your money, Leibowitz said. Two major problems here. One, if it's the company's money, it's not his money, even if it's his company. If it were Santos personally doing business as the company, that is, if it were his bank accounts, that's okay. But this is an actual corporation, and you can't make a corporation to run money through to your campaign, right? It can't be a fake. The reason, he explained, is that such a scheme hides the origin of the money. We know in previous filings he didn't have very much money at all, so it raises a massive question of what the origins of this $700,000 are, Leibowitz said. If I wished to illegally fund a campaign and hide it, what I would do is run the money through a dummy corporation, then to a dark money group that supports the campaign. But if I was not that up on things, or maybe a little lazy, I might just set up a dummy corporation, say it's in the name of the candidate, then have the candidate pay himself the money and give it to the campaign, Leibowitz said. This isn't to say that this is clearly an illegal pass-through donation scheme, because we just don't know the full picture yet. But if it were one, this is what it would look like, right? Russian oligarch gives you a bunch of money, or says he'll give you a bunch of money to run for Congress. And you say, I'll get caught if I just say, my campaign is funded 100% by Russian oligarchs. So I won't want to say that. So here's how I'll disguise it. I'll set up the DeVolder organization and say it's my personal business, and that I do quote unquote consulting work. And you can pay me for quote unquote consulting work. And then I, as the sole employee of DeVolder organization, will draw a salary of almost all of the money that you gave me. And then I will hand almost all of that money over to the campaign. And therefore, if you have $1 million, pay me $1 million consulting contract. I'll pay $750,000 of that million to myself. I will donate $700,000 of the $750,000 to my campaign, and you will have laundered $700,000 of Russian oligarch money into what looks, at each stage of the game, like a legal campaign contribution, when in fact it would be an illegal one if you deconstruct what actually happened. Got it? Brendan Fisher, Deputy Executive Director of Government Watchdog Documented, said that corporate contributions to campaigns and leadership PACs are expressly prohibited. Santos made loans to both with knowing and willful violations carrying possible criminal charges, right? You got to go through, even if you go through those steps, if it can be reconstructed, that's what you did, well, then they have the case against you. But if they can't prove for sure that all of the money you paid yourself is from your Russian clients, and you can't prove for sure that it's not a real company that just suddenly is paying him an awful lot of money, each of these steps creates a little bit of deniability and a little bit of extra burden for the prosecution to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that this was actually the plan. So, Santos might be in a hard place either way you slice it, Fisher told the Daily Beast, speculating on the possibilities. Fisher said one theory is that the DeVolder organization was a shell that functioned to allow wealthy donors to secretly bankroll Santos's 2022 run for Congress. If that were the case, it could implicate not just Santos, but anyone who used it to knowingly evade disclosure requirements and contribution limits. But even if the DeVolder organization is a legitimate company, then Santos could still have violated the law if he diverted corporate funds to his campaign. Merely transferring funds from DeVolder's account to Santos's own account would not magically transform the funds into Santos's personal assets, Fisher explained. A candidate may lend personal funds to his campaign, but they may not do so using corporate funds. A loan is treated as a contribution, and corporations are barred from making contributions, he said. Santos was simultaneously running for federal office, a strenuous undertaking for any candidate, while spinning up the DeVolder organization as a lucrative financial services company. Or so he claimed, anyway. Fisher speculated that investigators may follow the paper trail to verify Santos's description of using corporate funds to fund his campaign, for example, by matching dates of withdrawals to the dates he made the loans. Santos has said he worked in the capital introduction business, where he would connect wealthy people looking to sell things like a boat or a plane with other wealthy people looking to buy a boat or a plane. So he's like Craigslist for rich people, which isn't always that lucrative. Normally, capital introduction, I was under the impression the capital introduction was, you are a wealthy person looking for a good investment, and I will steer you to this, either wealth management company or this private equity concern or hedge fund, and you will invest there, and I get a sort of a finder's fee for bringing you in the door. I didn't really think of capital introduction as, hey, you're rich and you want to buy a boat? I know a rich guy who's selling a boat, because that's called the want ads. Anyway, Santos, who in 2020 reported holding no assets and a salary of $55,000 from a vice president position at a financial company called Linkbridge, appears to have suddenly come into substantial wealth, claiming a net worth of as much as $11.5 million on his 2022 financial disclosure. Almost all of it came through the newly formed DeVolder organization, which the 34-year-old said paid him between $1 million and $5 million in dividends, along with another $750,000 in salary, which is rather amazing. In a conversation with the Daily Beast on Wednesday, Santos argued the money he moved from the DeVolder organization to his campaign was legally loaned from his own personal funds because he was the company's sole owner. A little bit of Trumpism there. Doesn't understand the legalities of jumping through the right hoops. But the company is not legally indistinguishable from Santos. It is registered with the state of Florida as an independent LLC, and it has its own accounts separate from him personally. Informed of the rules, Santos promised he would immediately look into the matter, he was supposed to do that before, and rectify anything that needed to be addressed. That might be an enormous undertaking, given the amount of company money Santos appears to have put into his political efforts. That money, it turns out, came from some wealthy sources who also had financial stakes in Santos's political bid. The Daily Beast has confirmed 4 DeVolder organization clients: the New York-based Tantillo Auto Group, 2 organizations tied to the influential Ruiz family in South Florida, and another firm associated with Long Island insurance magnate James C. Metzger. Santos acknowledged all 4 of those clients on Wednesday. The members of the Tantillo and Ruiz families, could be Tantillo, I'm not certain whether they pronounce it that way or not, along with Metzger, all also happen to be Santos campaign donors. That is odd, isn't it? Although, I guess you could say, well, he's a great consultant and he's made me lots of money. Now he's running for Congress and he asked me what I contribute to his campaign. And yeah, sure. I mean, there's a reasonable, that's a not unreasonable story. I mean, given all the other things we've learned about Santos, it might be wise to think that it was really just a pass-through scheme, but you could construct another story. Some of them have further stakes in the Long Island political scene, including major donation to top Santos ally Representative Lee Zeldin as well, who lost his bid for governor this year. 3 members of the Tantillo, we'll say, family gave $44,800 to Santos's political efforts, according to the FEC. 3 members of the Ruiz family, who appeared on the incorporation documents, have given $17,300. Metzger gave $23,700. The donations include large gifts to the DeVolder Santos Victory Committee, and in Metzger's case, DeVolder Santos Nassau Victory Committee, 2 joint fundraising groups that split money between the congressman's campaign and his leadership PAC, which is, again, amazing to have a leadership PAC before you're ever even elected to Congress. None of the donors gave to Santos prior to 2022. As the New York Times reported in its first article last week, dismantling many of the fresh-faced Republicans' lies. None of the businesses appeared on the financial disclosure that Santos filed this year. That's a problem all by itself. That failing, the Times reported, could run afoul of House ethics rules. Santos told the Daily Beast he was in the process of amending his disclosure to be fully transparent, and he said he would file the disclosure next week. That's a trick, of course, that he may have picked up from any number of bad actors, including Jared Kushner, who just basically said, well, there's a lot of stuff in here in my life that if I disclose it, it's going to look terrible, so I won't disclose it. If they find out and call me on it, I'll say I'll amend my report, and I'll add the ones that I've already been busted on. And then, if they bust me on another ones, I'll disclose those too, and another amendment. I think he did like 7 amendments on his things, right? Anyway, the leadership PAC thing is particularly astonishing too, not just because he hasn't even been elected yet, but remember that part of the knock on leadership PACs is they can be used to climb the ladder, but they can also be used as personal slush funds, as Rick Santorum did, buying Starbucks and Arby's with them.
Sup, fam? It's your boy Darwin, aka Darwin_Darko, aka the most reasonable man in America, aka KITM's senior black correspondent. You might remember me from such recordings as Spacemen vs. Space Cadets and We Need to Talk About Joe Biden. Today, I want to bring you good news about that thing you've been struggling with. Do you suffer from giving too much of a damn? Do you turn on the series of tubes and find yourself outraged at the particular way some news organization strung some sentences together only to realize, nope, this is not some fictional hellscape? Well, guess what? You no longer have to accept the life of giving too much of a damn. You can do something about it, because even you, yes you, can be a show contributor. Now I know what you're thinking. Hey, Mr. Most Reasonable Man in America, I'm not some professional podcast talking guy. Don't worry about it. Do you have a smartphone or some other electronic recording device? Well, that's all you need. You too can have a segment where you can read us an important article and give us your take. Read one of your own original essays, or even just give us your commentary on something you'd like to share that's important to you. Fair warning though, side effects may include general punditry, having opinions and hot takes, getting stuff off your chest, and hearing your own voice. If your recording lasts longer than 5 to 7 minutes, please consult kagrox@gmail.com. That's KAGROX@gmail.com.
All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. Well, we're running low again on time here, and it's George Santos Fest once again. But I don't know. I think if we explain exactly what's going on, we'll be able to keep up to date and understand new pieces of the puzzle as they fall into place. In this fast-breaking story, the race against the January 3rd swearing in for George Santos. They're going to lose that race, so we really have more time than we think here. But okay, this will be when the pace of the story is the fastest. Where do we leave off? Oh, yes, right. Reminding everybody that leadership PACs, in addition to being used to build clout inside Congress, well, first of all, you're supposed to get there first. Then it usually takes a couple of years, although sometimes lots of people realize, well, I would like to be able to climb the leadership ladder someday, even if I don't anticipate it happening right away. I'm going to start building for the future if I have access to additional excess campaign cash. And usually brand new members of Congress don't have that much access to it, especially if they're loaning their own campaign $700,000, to make it in the first place. The excess cash thing is highly questionable. What it really means is I have a couple of big donors who are limited legally in how much they can give to my campaign directly. However, they can support my operations by giving, if they have more to give than what's the legal limit, they just give the legal limit, if any, to my leadership PAC. And because I can use it either to donate to other Republican candidates in order to build a following and climb the ladder in leadership later, or use it to pay for my other political operations and things that I either can't pay for directly out of campaign cash or need to, if I have a need to spend campaign dollars on actual campaign things, but I still need to be able to support my lifestyle, I can pay for that out of my leadership PAC. That can pay for travel and plane tickets and car rentals. It can pay for meals. It can pay for accommodations. So much more flexible to use for lifestyle support. And that's the much more likely reason for the use of a leadership PAC, considering that he's not actually a member of Congress at this point. So anyway, where do we leave off in the reading? Right. Santos was going to make his amendments. That's right. Asked if he could confirm the full slate of clientele that would appear on that amendment. Santos replied that under legal advisement, I can't do that for the simple fact of what was missing and what discrepancies were done there to fill in the blanks. That doesn't mean anything. And, certainly, well, I guess the cover for not telling us anything was, well, my lawyer says I really shouldn't. And you probably shouldn't at this point. But then he said, I've got nothing to hide, which is obviously untrue because you just hid it. I mean, you wish you didn't have to hide, but you just told us your lawyers advised you to hide it. So what is it that, I mean, if you don't want to tell us what you're hiding, you at least have to acknowledge that you do have something to hide. I just listened to you hide it. So this again is another great example of, a chatbot might be writing this. It doesn't make any logical sense. Can you tell us who the clients are? No, I'm under legal advisement not to do that, but I have nothing to hide. Except for what I'm hiding. And what else? He's doing his best to come clean and atone for the lies that he fed voters. He's not very good at it, though. He emphasized that he also wanted to look out for his clients' best interests and didn't want them to be burdened by the political gauntlet he's currently running through as the media begins to unravel his false claims, along with other secrets that didn't surface in either of his two congressional campaigns. Also, that makes no sense. I mean, mouthing these words, these are words that a person who really had been in the consulting business for some amount of time might say. I really don't want to burden my clients with this. They didn't, they didn't know what they're getting. They didn't opt to run for Congress. And I may have, if he were consulting for a decade or more and then ran for Congress, and he didn't tell his clients much about it because he didn't maybe expect to win, and they, so they didn't hear much about it, whatever. But then he wins, then you got to say, well, this is a bit of a surprise. I didn't think I was going to win, but I did, and now I have to kind of wind down the business, and there's some possibility there could be negative press for you because I'm going to be under scrutiny because I'm entering Congress. I'm sorry about that. But remember that this guy, one, isn't really consulting with anybody. Two, started his consulting business, 6 months ago. Three, was already a second-time candidate for Congress by the time he started his consulting business. So it's really difficult to make the argument that, well, my clients didn't know what they were getting into, and I feel bad about that. Especially since, as it turns out, he doesn't really have any clients, probably. They're all political patrons and know full well that their money is going to be tied up in political considerations because that's why they're giving it. So another set of lies, I would guess. Public records, it says, already reveal a great deal, so there is something to this. Florida corporate filings show two DeVolder LLC. What? Show two DeVolder LLC. I guess two DeVolder LLCs were created about 2 weeks apart in January 2022. Their leadership consists of relatives of billionaire Miami attorney John Ruiz, a personal injury and class action lawyer who parlayed his Medicare payer recovery business into a multi-billion-dollar IPO that flopped this summer. In September of 2021, Alex Ruiz, then 22 years old, became CEO of Cigarette Racing, a renowned luxury powerboat manufacturer, which his family took over in the course of building their multi-billion-dollar special purpose acquisition company. Remember those things? The SPACs? Special purpose acquisition company. That this is what the people that invested in Trump Media LLC and Truth Social, et cetera, right? They had a SPAC too. They put, so here's the Ruiz's own SPAC, and what they did with it was buy a cigarette boat, racing boat manufacturing concern because they're awesome and chicks dig them. So 22-year-old Alex Ruiz bought himself such a company. A few months later, the Ruiz children created the entities that would retain the DeVolder organization. Myra Ruiz told the Daily Beast they hired the DeVolder organization in early 2022, but did not reply to follow-ups. Notably, in an interview with Semaphore on Wednesday, we should look at that, Santos named yacht sales as one of the tasks that the DeVolder organization handled for its clients. On March 31st, Myra Ruiz contributed $10,800 to Santos's joint fundraising committee. Other campaign finance filings reveal the extent to which Santos's business clients were entangled not only with his campaign, but with Zeldin's and with the local political infrastructure that supported them both. For example, and let me go back and make sure I have access to the Semaphore article. For example, the Tantillo Auto Group controls a cluster of new and used car lots in Long Island, many in Zeldin's house district, rather. Patriarch Raymond Tantillo gave $50,000 to Zeldin's gubernatorial campaign, Zeldin for New York, with the Tantillo Auto Group pitching in another $5,000. Catherine Tantillo also donated $50,000 to Zeldin's ultimately unsuccessful Albany bid in March of 2022. Metzger, CEO of insurance provider the Whitmore Group, is another major New York GOP donor. In the 2022 election, he contributed $60,000 to Zeldin, along with $155,000 to the Nassau County Republican Party on Santos's home turf. The local machine lent Santos substantial support during the campaign, both forming joint fundraising committees with his operation and paying for his lawn signs, which are important, through Nassau County Republican Party leadership, though the leadership has since expressed disaffection with Santos. Sorry about that. Congressman-elect George Santos has broken the public trust by making serious misstatements regarding his background, experience, and education, among other issues. Nassau County Republican Party Chairman Joseph Kagro said in a press release this week, the DeVolder organization contracted with Whitmore's parent company, Acrisure, A-C-R-I-S-U-R-E, Acrisure, an agreement the congressman-elect in a conversation Wednesday clarified was not with Whitmore Group specifically, though he did not say though he said he did not know how to spell Acrisure. Okay. That's a great question, Santos told the Daily Beast. Acrisure bought the rights to Acrisure Stadium, the home of the Pittsburgh Steelers. Okay, so, sizable concern. And the web extends beyond even the DeVolder organization's customers. Concurrent with Santos's second successful congressional bid, his sister ran a political action committee called Rise New York PAC. The group's website is currently down and was last archived in August of this year, although it professed to also have operations in California and Colorado. There is no record of it raising or spending money outside of the Empire State. The materials filed in New York show that Rise New York PAC paid around $25,000 to the Santos sibling, who he says lives with him in Long Island. Rise New York PAC also paid about $50,000 to a man named Harry Brar, B-R-A-R, the head of Nassau County Asian Affairs, who was arrested in September for, what can you do? He was allegedly choking a 10-year-old boy and assaulting his mother. So, these things happen. Rise New York PAC poured cash into the Zeldin and Santos boosting Nassau County Republican Party, as well as into a town GOP committee that in turn gave heavily to the county organization. So definitely some laundering going on here. The PAC also counted among its contributors the financier Andrew Intrater, cousin and money manager to the sanctioned Russian oligarch Viktor Vekselberg, who contributed a combined $80,000 to the PAC per state records. So a lot more than we originally thought. Intrater and his wife were also two of the largest donors to both Zeldin and Santos. Santos has come under increasing pressure and scrutiny since the Times reported earlier this month that it fabricated many of the details of his career, including his supposed possession of a college degree and stints at prominent financial institutions. This story followed an article by the Daily Beast this past April, which uncovered his work for an alleged multi-million-dollar Ponzi scheme. Several of his co-workers from the accused investment scam, none of whom have been charged with a crime, formed a political consulting group with the DeVolder organization after the scandal broke. The Daily Beast subsequently discovered that Santos, who has made his gay identity a central part of his political brand, had been married to a woman for several years, almost right up to the launch of his first congressional campaign in 2019. The forward also found that Santos's claims of Jewish roots were also without basis, something the politician later confessed, even as he bizarrely claimed that his family lore allowed him to identify as Jewish. That he has also insisted he will be seated in Congress, despite calls for him to resign. So, okay. That is, some crazy, weird, wild stuff out there. George Santos is over in Semaphore. The latest from Kadia Goba on him trying to explain his wealth. Let's see if we can run through that one quickly, and then we'll clean up and get a couple other stories spat out before the end of the day. Let's see. Santos has admitted to, quote, embellishing his resume with fake stints on Wall Street, phantom college degree as well, still trying to defend against accusations that he pretended to be Jewish and now, I guess, biracial as well. But the burning question for many people, including his soon-to-be Republican and Democratic colleagues in Congress, is simple. Where did he get the money to fund his campaign? Where did all that money come from? Representative Richie Torres, Democrat of New York, tweeted on Tuesday, the Ethics Committee must start investigating immediately. When he first ran for Congress in 2020, Santos, who appeared to have suffered from financial trouble for much of his adult life, normal troubles, I think, that a lot of people suffer from, but now he's a millionaire, so weird. Anyway, he filed disclosures listing no assets and a salary of $55,000, which he earned as a vice president at Linkbridge Investors. But those filings from his most recent run, or the new filings from his most recent run, suggest he came into sudden riches, very sudden, making between $3.5 and $11.5 million from a company he founded called the DeVolder Organization, founded in 2021. He loaned his campaign more than $700,000. In a phone conversation with Semaphore, Santos offered a short tick-tock of how he made his money that left certain key details unanswered. At Linkbridge, he said he worked in the so-called capital introduction industry, which typically brings together investors and hedge funds. Right. He eventually left that job for Harbor City Capital, a Florida firm that the SEC accused in April of 2021 of running a $17 million Ponzi scheme. Santos wasn't charged in that, and he says he departed in March, shortly before the company ran into legal trouble, in order to strike out on his own. He incorporated DeVolder in May, a few weeks after the SEC filed suit against Harbor City. Santos said that DeVolder was also in the capital introduction business, including deal building and specialty consulting for high net worth individuals. As an example of his work, he essentially gave them an example of things that are not the work typically of capital introduction people or specialty consulting or deal builders, but rather Craigslist brokerage, essentially. He says, as an example of his work, a client might want to sell a plane or a boat. I'm not going to go list it and broker it, he said. What I will do is I will go look out there within my Rolodex and be like, hey, are you looking for a plane? Are you looking for a boat? I just put that feeler out there. He said he had a network of wealthy investors, family offices, institutions, and endowments that included about 15,000 people. Within the first 6 months of starting DeVolder, he said he, quote, landed a couple of $1 million contracts. If you're looking at a $20 million yacht, my referral fee there can be anywhere from between $200,000 and $400,000. So what, 10 and 20%? Or I guess, or 1 and 2%, I guess. $200,000 is, 10% of 2 million and, 1% of, so 1 to 2%. That's a thing you can do, taking a 1 or 2% finder's fee on those things. I just don't know that he's going to land all that in 6 months with people who are looking to invest in hedge funds, but instead calling around and saying, you want a boat? You want a boat? You want a boat? He called 15,000 people asking if they wanted boats or planes. All right. And ran for Congress at the same time. Santos did not respond to follow-up questions asking what the $1 million contracts entailed or if he could share the names of previous clients from his business. We learned of 4 of them in the last article. DeVolder was dissolved in September of 2022 after failing to file an annual report. Given that timing, Representative-elect Dan Goldman of New York has raised the question of whether it was created merely to funnel illegal campaign donations. Santos added further to the mystery by reviving DeVolder in Florida last week, after the New York Times ran its initial bombshell story about fabrications in his resume at an address reportedly owned by a former Harbor City executive. Santos told, why at somebody else's address at all if you were a multimillionaire? Santos told Semaphore that DeVolder only shut down because his accountant accidentally submitted its paperwork late. Who is that accountant? Republicans have been reluctant to weigh in on Santos's controversy, but on Tuesday, Representative-elect Nick LaLota, right, we mentioned him before, followed Democrats in calling for an ethics investigation and law enforcement involvement if necessary. Then there was D'Esposito, who joined in. Goldman, a former prosecutor, told Semaphore he thought a formal inquiry might be necessary if Santos simply volunteered documents about his business dealings and finances, or might not be necessary if he just volunteered these things. If he wants to avoid an investigation and he wants to truly come clean and says he has nothing to hide, right, as he claimed he was trying to do yesterday and that other Republican members elected called for him to do, then he should be an open book and reveal all of this related to the DeVolder organization. That, however, seems unlikely to happen soon. I don't dance to the tune of Congressman-elect Dan Goldman, Santos told Semaphore. I don't dance to the tune of these guys. If it was requested of me to produce any documentation from this organization, I have no problem doing so to people with the proper authority, not to authoritarian members of Congress that think they have the authority over their peers, which they do, but anyway, they're representatives-elect. They have as much authority to ask you those questions as you do to have a leadership pack. But okay, so, this is the indignation game and he's dodging the questions and it should be viewed as exactly that. All right. I mentioned, let's see, maybe the news from the Washington Post about the 2 ongoing investigations. I've got 2 other things that focus on one each, but this sums up both. Nassau County District Attorney opens investigation into Representative-elect George Santos. Oh, wait, does this not have both? This is the Washington Post on the local angle. Do I have one that has both? I thought that we did. Let's see. No? All right. Well, we'll have to do them one at a time, I guess, but maybe we'll do the abbreviated version of this stuff. Ozzy Paibara is the writer for the Washington Post on this one. This is the district attorney in Nassau County, Ann Donnelly, opening the investigation. But what exactly is it they're looking at? I mean, yes, there were fabrications, but I guess maybe it's open-ended. So they're just going, oh, okay, let's see. What does she say? She just says everything is unbelievable here, but the statement was the numerous fabrications and inconsistencies associated are nothing short of stunning. The residents in the congressional district must have an honest and accountable representative in Congress. If a crime was committed in this country, we will prosecute it. But the crime that he's charged with is actually from Brazil, so I don't know what they're going to do about that one. So it just doesn't say exactly what they are investigating in the Nassau County level. And I don't know, or is there any discussion of the federal investigation that is reported by CNN's Pamela Brown, who says federal prosecutors in New York are investigating, so they're based in New York, but they're federal prosecutors, investigating the finances, right? News of the probe being undertaken by the U.S. Attorney's Office for the Eastern District of New York, not the Southern District, the Eastern District of New York, comes as the Republican has admitted to lying about key parts of his biography. He's faced questions over his wealth and the loans to the campaign, right? The U.S. Attorney's Office declined to comment. So I guess maybe that's it. We're opening investigations, but we're declining to discuss exactly what directions we're going in. And I guess it's just early days. So we'll have to follow along. That's a good excuse for getting out of this story at this point. But know that there are 2 investigations that are alleged to now be open. Okay. I promised you some news about crazy lunatics from Republicans from the desert Southwest. Carrie Lake, right, continuing to press her claims by appealing the dismissal of 8 of her 10 counts in her lawsuit. But news on a name we haven't heard about in a long time, but who used to be a regular in the crazy desert Southwest MAGA GOP loser weirdo panoply. Nevada Republicans have appointed failed GOP politician with no judicial experience to a judgeship. Now, she's listed here as a failed GOP politician. Did she lose her seat somewhere along the line? This is our old friend. Those longtime listeners will remember perhaps Michelle Fiore, Republican of Nevada, a state legislator who was, of course, a huge gun nut for many years, but she was like producing, lifestyle videos and movies at some point and couldn't make up her mind about whether she wanted to go Hollywood or continue in politics or both. I guess she must have lost her bid for re-election, so they put her on the bench, which is real stupid. But here we go. Daniel Villarreal, writing for the new civil rights movement, published here in Alternet. Michelle Fiore, Republican politician, has been appointed to a Nevada judgeship, even though she has no prior legal or judicial experience. She has also previously been accused of obstructing an investigation into her own business and once said, "It's okay to point a gun at federal officers." That should be awesome. Fiore will fill a seat on the Pahrump Justice Court in Nye County. Pahrump Justice Court. What? It's not the Nye County, Court of Appeals or anything. It's the Pahrump Justice Court. I'm going to have to look up what the hell we're even talking about here. In Nye County, I guess, is that a locality, a municipality that has its own bench? Pahrump Justice Court in Nye County, located about 65 miles west of Las Vegas, if you want to look it up. According to the Associated Press, county commissioners unanimously appointed her to the judgeship. She will serve on the court through 2024. Not that long. She told commissioners that she would oversee the judicial appointment oversee the judicial appointment. She would carry out the judicial appointment, but with integrity and honesty. Not that she knows what those are, because she has been, quote, at the end of the political barrel, which I think she means like the barrel of a gun. She's been at the wrong end of the political gun. I don't know what she's trying to say here. However, it seems she ended up at the end of that barrel, largely due to her own fault. In 2015, Nevada state regulators revoked the license of her home health business after she refused to show financial records during an investigation of alleged Medicaid fraud, Wonkette noted. That same year, she made statements against transgender people using changing facilities matching their gender identities. In 2016, she said it was okay to point a gun at law enforcement officers if they point a gun at you first. I mean, it's a little dangerous, to say the least. I would never, ever point my firearm at anyone, including an officer of the law, unless they pointed their firearm at me, she said in an interview with Las Vegas TV station KLAS. Now, once you point your firearm at me, I'm sorry, then it becomes self-defense. So whether you're a stranger or a bad guy or an officer and you point your gun at me and you're going to shoot me and I have to decide whether it's my life or your life, I choose my life. I mean, and not entirely crazy, I guess, except for this specific scenario. If they've got a gun on you and you say, well, I have to decide, is it my life or your life? And I decide on saving my life and draw my gun. If they're already pointing a gun at you, you're just shot. So I don't know. Maybe they miss and you think you're going to hit them. Dive out of the way and matrix out of the path of the bullet. Okay. The Nevada Association of Public Safety Officers called her statement utterly irresponsible, an embarrassment, and a demonstration of why she's unfit to hold national office or really own a gun. But though Fiore was a member of the Nevada Assembly from 2012 to 2016 and a member of the Las Vegas City Council from 2017 until her appointment to the judgeship. She launched a failed 2022 election bid to become the Nevada State Treasurer. I didn't realize that. And failed in 2016 in her bid to become a state representative. Well, it says a state representative in the U.S. House. So a United States representative in the U.S. House would be the proper rundown on that one. Okay, so good. I'm glad she lost. That's good news, but now she's going to be on the bench, and that's probably bad news, although in order to get in her way, you have to get yourself into legal trouble in Pahrump, I guess, in Pahrump, Nevada. So stay out of there. Unless you're crazy. I don't know what to tell you. Anyway, that's news. Just a little Michelle Fiore update. You may recognize her name. You might recognize her from her photo if you check it out in today's roundup of stories. We'll get to Kari Lake and what she's up to perhaps tomorrow. Just know that she's appealing her losses in the district level court, and I do have to share with you a piece from Amanda Marcotte on her, just basically another roundup of what does it mean that Kari Lake is so particularly crazy and just won't take no for an answer, no matter who tells her and what court tells her you lost. She just continues on, and this too is simply going to be the future of the Republican Party from here on in. All right, we do have another program ahead of us tomorrow, and perhaps we can sift through all of these remaining stories and read some of the longer ones and share them. But in the meantime, you know what comes next. It's the West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy with Justice Putnam following us right here on Netroots Radio. We got a little time. Let's tell you what he's got in store for you. Well, he'll be covering the story of Mark Meadows burning documents, apparently, in his White House office, according to some of those January 6th transcripts. That may be a dozen times. I think Cassidy Hutchinson told us that one, right after a meeting with Scott Perry during the transition period. As a matter of fact, one of those incidents there. There's much more. I'll squeeze a little bit of that in after this.
From netrootsradio.com, you have been listening to Kagro in the Morning with David Waldman.
Look at this. The EPA is investigating Colorado for racially discriminatory air pollution regulations. And how about this one? In courtrooms across America, defendants got additional prison time for crimes that juries found they didn't commit. I'd love to have an explanation of that, and I'll get it too if I stay tuned and listen to Justice next.